All right, I think we are live. And
Can you double check that your audio is coming from the camera? Sorry.
audio.
Settings.
All right, we'll be with you guys in just a moment. Audio, mic, testing,
Okay, great.
testing.
Yeah.
Are we good?
Yeah.
Oh, there's actually another digital audio cam link. Should I try that one? Let's see if that's better.
Yeah, I think they're the same, but sure.
Testing, 1, 2, 3, 4. Testing. I'm gonna.
That works.
That's better.
I think it's about the same, but no.
All right, can you guys online hear me now? All right, we are live. We have a fairly quiet night here tonight. I guess it's summertime, and it's also not the typical first Friday night of the month. And as you guys know, or many of you know, I've been off a couple of months running around the UK and, Portugal and Spain and Sweden and Czech Republic and too much volume, and Italy and Denmark. And it's been a great trip, but I'm glad to be home, even though things here in the United States are pretty crazy, crazier than they are in other places. And I can see here that my computer is not plugged in. Hold on. All right. And I apologize for starting late, but we had some cable connection issues like it seems that we do. And I would blame it on Mercury. Actually, I can blame it on Mercury because Mercury just entered its shadow. Or it's just entering its shadow over the next day or so. So maybe Mercury's already a little weird. It is slowing down. But we'll talk a little bit more about Mercury retrograde as we get further into this. And tonight, what I'd really like to do is just, are we okay, Sam? All right,
Yeah.
All right. What I'd really like to do tonight is to kind of talk a little bit about why things feel so weird. And they do. And they are. And you don't need to be an astrologer to know that things are pretty strange out there. Strange, complicated, uncertain, not okay, out of balance. And so the question is why, and will it get any better? Or will it get worse? And the answer, I think, to both of those things is yes. I think that we're not at the end of this tunnel, and I think that things will get a little crazier and stranger, but I do think that there is a longer-term prognosis that has some potential. Although I think right now, when we look at what's going on day to day, it's a little bit hard to see that. And so I'm going to try to give you a little bit of perspective this evening as to why I actually think that we're not in as bad shape as it seems. Or let me say that differently. We are in as bad shape as it seems. And there are things that we can and must do to get through this and out the other side, which I think is very, very possible and probable only if enough people wake up. And people are waking up, and that's the exciting thing. There's a lot of energy that is going toward this big awakening, and I'm not going to try to Pollyanna it and say that we're all going to ascend, but but I will come back to this ascension thing in a little bit because there is something going on here. And all right, let me back up a little bit and just give some astrological overview for what I want to dig into in a bit. So, as many of you know, those of you who follow astrology a bit, you know that there's been action through the outer planets as they've been changing signs. Now, in astrology, each planet has its own energy. You know, Mars is the energy of passion and feistiness and direct action and god of war. Mars engages, it's physical. Venus is gentler, and Venus is more about desires and what we want. Uranus is the rebel planet. It's shocking and awakening. Uranus is like lightning striking. So the planets, each of the planets have their own energy. But depending upon two things makes the energy of that planet seem different. One of those two things is what sign the planet is in. I think of the signs kind of like as nations. If you're fiery and feisty and you live in Italy, that may be very different than being fiery and feisty and living in Finland. That as planets move into different signs, it's almost like the costumes they're wearing. I think of Venus, for example, as Venus is moving through Pisces. Pisces is compassionate and soft and spiritual and gentle and compassionate and sometimes confused. And in Pisces, Venus might be dressed soft or wearing maybe Angora fur and seem kind of like a bunny rabbit. But when Venus moves from Pisces into Aries, Venus changes her costume and puts on some knee-high leather boots, and looks a whole lot more assertive and directive. The energy of the planet is the same, but how it's expressed is differently. That's the first thing. The second thing, I said that there are two things that temper the archetype of each of the planets. The first is what sign they're in, and the second is what relationship they're making geometrically with other planets in the sky. We astrologers call those aspects. If two planets are in the same place, they're conjoined. If they're opposite each other, like a tug of war, they're in opposition. And each of these aspects has their own flavor also. So the moon, for example, changes signs every a little bit less than 2.5 days. And so the moon is constantly changing. In fact, if you want to understand the moon, think of emotions because they constantly change. The tides are always moving up or down or changing directions. And so the moon changes signs so often that it feels normal when it changes signs. We may not even notice it because the moon changes signs. Right now, the moon is in. Right now, the moon is at 11 degrees of Leo. Yeah, which means that by Sunday, the moon will change signs into Virgo. However, the moon was in Leo 1 month ago, because that's what a month is, 1 moon cycle. And the moon was in Leo 2 months ago, and so on. And so the moon moving into Leo once a month is no big deal. If we're attuned to the moon, we may feel subtle changes in the emotional, energetic field, but it's not overwhelming. Compare that with Pluto, which takes somewhere between 12 and 30 some odd years to go through one sign, which means that when Pluto changes signs, we know it. may not be on that day, but the energy of that planet right now, as many of you know, in the spring in March of 2023. God, can you believe that's 2 years ago already? Stage is making a very strange sound. I know, don't stand there. The guy goes into the doctor's office and says, "Doc, you got to help me. Every time I have a cup of coffee, I get this stabbing pain in my left eye." And the doctor says, "Take the spoon out of your coffee." Why am I making that sound again? Okay. So the last time Pluto changed signs from Capricorn to Aquarius was around the time of the American Revolution and the setting up of the American judiciary system, the French Revolution, the First Continental Congress, and that was like 248 years ago. So we are experiencing Pluto in a new environment where it hasn't been for 2.5 centuries. And Pluto first tipped into Aquarius last March. And then because of the retrograde motion, it backed into Capricorn and then went back into Aquarius, back into Capricorn, and now it's in Aquarius, and it will be in Aquarius for the next 20 years, the next couple of decades. So Pluto in Aquarius, just that changing of signs, is very profound, very powerful, and we could spend a whole evening talking about Aquarius as the sign of collective consciousness, Aquarius as the sign of the community, Aquarius connected to inventions and technology. And remember when Uranus moved into Aquarius last time, scientists were running around working with electricity for the first time. Benjamin Franklin was flying his kite, realizing that lightning is electricity, while Galvani was actually doing experiments on frogs, on dead frogs, and poking them with electrical current and watching them twitch as if they were still alive, and realizing that electricity drives our nervous system. So now that Pluto is back in Aquarius, we can expect, and we've already seen, huge jumps and breakthroughs and evolution into new forms of technology. In fact, the day that Pluto moved into Aquarius, March 2023, for the first time in some 230 years, whatever it was, that was the day that ChatGPT was announced. And so we look at things like this as signals, as symptoms of what it is that's coming around the bend. So Pluto's change of sign is a big deal, but it does it every, depending upon how close Pluto is to the sun, its orbit is quite elliptical. When it's close to the sun, it moves faster and it can go through a sign in 12 to 15 years. When Pluto's farther away from the sun, it can take 30, 35 years to go through a sign. So Pluto's change is important because now Pluto is in Aquarius and it's not going back into Capricorn, until it goes all the way around a couple of centuries down the road. On top of that, we've had Neptune, which is the next planet in from Pluto, which goes through a sign in about 14 years. And so Neptune changing signs is a bit more regular. Excuse me. It's a bit more regular than Pluto, and a bit faster, but it's like every decade and a half, Neptune is in a new sign. And we could trace Neptune back over the decades and see what has happened with Neptune in each of the signs. Now, Pluto is the planet of death and regeneration. That sounds awful, but it really is the planet of evolution. If you think of a caterpillar becoming a butterfly, the caterpillar's got to die for the butterfly to appear. And so evolution is a process of letting go of the old and stepping into the new. Neptune is associated with dreams, imagination, with spiritual things, metaphysical things. Neptune is the planet of fantasy. And so as Neptune changes signs, and Neptune just changed signs a couple months ago, after having been in Pisces, again, Pisces, the dreamer, Neptune's kind of at home in Pisces. And now Neptune has just moved into Aries, where it's a bit more forceful. Our dreams and our illusions and the magic of the non-physical dimensions are going to be more in our face as Neptune is now in Aries and will be for the next 14 years. We come in one planet from Neptune, and that's Uranus. Now, Uranus is an 84-year cycle, so it stays in each sign about 7 years. Still long enough to not be the moon. It's not always changing. And we're just coming out of of Uranus being in the sign of Taurus for the last 7 years. Right now, it is at 29 degrees of Taurus. Sam, what's showing on YouTube? Is it the chart or is it me?
Oh, right now it's your face, but I can throw the chart on too.
Yeah, could you do that? So here's a chart for actually right now, this minute. And normally when I do charts, I put Aries rising because depending on where you are on the planet, that determines the horizon. And yet what I wanted to do is I wanted to start off today with a chart of right now here in Redmond, Washington at 6:56 p.m. daylight time. And we can see that the sun is at 6 degrees of Cancer. The sun moves about a degree a day. So that means that about 6 or 7 days ago, the sun entered Cancer, which is the first moment of summer in the Northern Hemisphere. We can also see that the sun is very close to Jupiter, also in Cancer. And here I will mention, although I'm going to step ahead of myself and I'll come back to this, that Jupiter also last month changed signs from Gemini, where it had been for an entire year. Jupiter stays 1 year in each sign, and it moved into Cancer. And over the last few days, the sun lined up with Jupiter, making everything seem bigger than it is. Now, that doesn't mean that those things aren't big, but when the sun and Jupiter line up, it's like a magnifying lens is on everything. So that's part of what's been going on this last week, really. Since the first day of summer when the sun moved into Cancer. What I also want to show here is that this horizontal line from 9 Sagittarius on the far left to 9 Gemini on the far right, this is the horizon. This is a real map. And this is the horizon. And because we're looking up, the east and west are flipped. So the 9 Sagittarius is actually the east. And the planets rise in the east. They go up to the top of the chart, and then they come all the way around.
Microphone stand a little bit.
That would be a good idea. Thanks, Sam. So what I wanted you to see here is that the chart is actually a clock. And when we look at the sun, we can tell what time of day this chart is for, because if the chart showed the sun right there at the descendant point on the horizon, that would be sunset. So this chart is for, an hour or two before sunset. And in fact, tonight, once the sun goes down, I can actually move this ahead an hour at a time. No, not a day at a time. I can move this ahead an hour at a time. You can see how the sun and Jupiter get closer and closer to the horizon. And then by about 9 o'clock, the sun is right at the horizon. And then the sun goes beneath the horizon, and that's nighttime. Tonight, we'll be able to see a sliver of a moon because the new moon was just a couple days ago. And so the moon is moving away from the sun. All right, I want to come back to where we are right now and come back to the fact that we have Pluto in a new sign. It's at 3 degrees of Aquarius. We have Neptune and Saturn both having moved from Pisces into Aries. Neptune, the planet of dreams, and Saturn, the planet of reality. Many of you who have studied astrology probably know the work of Rob Hand. And Rob, many years ago, wrote that astrology used to teach that Saturn was reality and Neptune is illusion. However, now we know that Neptune is reality and Saturn is the illusion there was one. This is a really important concept right now because every 36 years, Saturn, which takes 30 years to go around once, Neptune, which takes 165 years to go around once, every 36 years, Saturn catches up to Neptune, just like once a month, the moon catches up to the sun. That's a new moon. When the moon and the sun line up, and every month, the moon goes all the way around and catches up to the sun again. Well, Neptune and Saturn line up every 36 years. But this year, actually early next year on February 20th, Saturn and Neptune will line up at 0 degrees of Aries. Why is this important? Now remember, I said that when planets change signs, they put on like a new costume. But when planets go from Pisces to Aries, Aries is the first moment of spring. It used to be the new year everywhere. Calendars got altered, but that birth of spring is actually when the sun moves into the sign of Aries. There are some branches or schools of astrology that say that the 0 degrees Aries point is so powerful that it should be put in the chart like it was a real planet. In other words, something happens when planets hit that 0 degrees Aries point. Saturn and Neptune line up every 36 years, but they've not lined up at 0 degrees of Aries for at least 3,000 or 4,000 years. I don't trust calculations from programs much beyond 4,000 years ago, but I know several astrologers, myself included, have looked back to around 2500 BC, and there's never been a Saturn-Neptune conjunction at 0 degrees of Aries. Why is this important? Well, astrology is based upon the concept of repeating cycles. We have a repeating cycle of Saturn catching up to Neptune every 36 years. But it's never done it, at least in our history, lined up at 0 degrees of Aries. And wait, there's more. So, as you may know, all the real planets, meaning not the sun and the moon, astrologers use the word planet in the Greek sense that means wanderer. So we call the sun and moon planets. So the real planets all go retrograde, meaning it looks like they go backwards. They don't go backwards. In fact, it's all perspective. And the perspective is so that when a planet gets close to the Earth, it can look like it's going backwards. In other words, if I hold the mic really far away and look at it from one eye to the other, the microphone moves that much against the background. But if I hold it really close, it moves a whole lot further. When planets get close to Earth, the illusion is that because the Earth is moving and we're seeing the stars behind the Earth, and the Earth is swinging past it, it looks like the planet's going backwards. They don't. But what it means is that the planet's closer to Earth than it is at any other time in their cycle. And so when planets turn retrograde, they're close to Earth. All planets do that. In fact, Mercury does that 3 times a year, which is why people often know about Mercury retrograde, because the outer planets do it typically just once a year, and they're retrograde for almost a half a year. And so it's like it's more like a third of a year. But the reason why we're talking about retrograde energy is, remember, Pluto moved into Aquarius and gave us a sense of, oh my God, there's new things going on. Artificial intelligence, ET, new technology, quantum computers. And then it backed up into Capricorn. And then it moved into Aquarius and back to Capricorn, and then into Aquarius where it now is. So the slower moving planets often wobble back and forth. And so the shift from one sign to another is not like sudden. It has like a flavor and then a kind of remedial work and then back in. So that's Pluto. Neptune has just moved into Aries, but it turns retrograde in a few days, in the first week of July, and it will back up into Pisces and then back into Aries. Saturn, which has also just moved into Aries, will turn retrograde later in July, and it too will back up into Pisces, then turn direct again and back into Aries. When Saturn and Neptune enter Aries after having backed up into Pisces, they will do that next January and early February, and that's when they align at 0 degrees of Aries exactly. But if we look at this chart right now for today, we can see that Saturn is at 1 degree of Aries and 45 minutes. You can think of this like a clock, you know, those old-fashioned things that had the hands going around, you know, yeah. 45 minutes is like 3/4 of an hour. So when a planet is at 1 degree Aries and 45 minutes, it's really 1 3/4 degrees. Meanwhile, Neptune is at 2 degrees of Aries and 10 minutes. That's like not quite a quarter past. So these two planets right now are within 1/2 a degree, one to the other. And in fact, by the time that we get to Phoenix, is that a song? By the time we get to the middle of the month, Saturn and Neptune will be within a few minutes of each other, having both turned retrograde already by the middle of the month. There we have Saturn at almost 5 minutes of orb away from 2 degrees, and Neptune at 8 minutes past 2 degrees. So they're like within less than 1/4 of a degree. But they don't get exact until next February. Why is this important? Well, when planets get close to each other, or close to whatever the angle is, this is called the orb of influence. And we already are feeling this Saturn-Neptune conjunction, even though it's not exact until next February. You with me? What does Saturn and Neptune mean? Keywords for Saturn: crystallization, reality, structure, stability. Sensible, I don't mean like common sense. I mean like we can feel it, touch it, taste it, see it. It's the 3-dimensional world. Saturn is authority. Saturn is separateness, so that you can maintain identity. Neptune, on the other hand, is the dissolution of boundary. It's dreams. In a dream, you can go anywhere. Anything that you think becomes immediately, quote unquote, real. Imagination has no limits. So what happens when Saturn and Neptune come together? Someone want to make up a story? No one's wrong when we do this kind of stuff. Come on, someone.
Dreams become real.
Dreams become real. That's a good one. What about real things fade into illusions? It's a two-way street. Yeah, someone, yeah.
About like breaking a mirror.
Say that again?
Breaking a mirror.
Like breaking the mirror. Well, yes, but because breaking has a sense of Uranian energy to it, because Uranus is the planet of sudden change, rock and roll, rebellion, lightning striking. That's the electricity. And we'll get there in a minute, and that's also going on. But Neptune is kind of like gradual. It's like magnetism. It's hard to tell where something begins and ends. And Saturn knows where everything begins and ends. If I don't know where I end and you begin, that's not good, unless I'm in love. Then it might be okay. Because Neptune is confusing. And confusion is not necessarily a bad thing. It's only bad if the ego is trying to identify itself and maintain the illusion of separateness. Neptune is that part of us that knows that there's something flowing through all of us that is the same, that we are all facets. In Hinduism, there's this concept called Indra's net that says every pearl on this net of everything, every pearl contains the reflection of every other pearl on the net. Neptune is the dream realm. So when Saturn and Neptune line up, we can become disillusioned. I've talked about this a few times over the last few months here, because disillusion is not a bad thing. It means that your illusions have become real. Often, when dreams become real, often they're not as good as they were when they were dreams. That's disillusionment. Often, dreams will never become real because they were too far out to manifest, even through the hard work and the structure and the discipline of Saturn. In that way, we also become disillusioned because our dream will never maybe become real. So this is what's going on right now. And we're seeing it in the news even this week. What happened in Iran? We don't know. Even the people who know don't know. This is Saturn, Neptune. Do you understand? Do you see how this is like connected? And although I could go off very political, that's not my intent tonight. My intent is to just demonstrate how these events that are unfolding to this dance that's happening cosmically, because when Saturn and Neptune align, it's hard to tell which side of the event horizon you're on, whether you're inside the black hole or outside and can't see in. So we have this Saturn-Neptune conjunction that is still moving closer together till the middle of July, and then it'll very gradually begin to separate as both planets turn retrograde, and then they'll come back together for the first exact time next year, February 20th. That in itself, and how close Saturn and Neptune are now in new signs, like we're getting used to, what the hell does this mean in Aries? You know, Aries is the sign that Mars is at home in. So Aries is related to war, to physical combat, to assertion, to aggression, to direction. And we're certainly seeing some of that. As Saturn moves through Aries, we're going to want to make our boundaries known. But Neptune there is going to make it a little more complicated, because even the boundaries will continue to dissolve. So we have Neptune and Saturn having just moved into Aries and getting closer and closer together throughout the month of, through till the mid-month of July, and then beginning very slowly to separate. Now, remember, I said there were two things with each planet, because the planet has its stuff, its archetype, but depending on what sign it is in, depends upon how it dresses up and kind of where it goes and what it does. So we have Saturn and Neptune newly exploring their fieriness, feistiness in Aries. We also have Pluto exploring its sense of evolutionary transformation in Aquarius, which is the highest frequency of all the signs. High frequency meaning it's maybe the indigo crown chakra. It's the high frequency thought. Aquarius is it's the ultraviolet, so to speak.
My Neptune and Uranus are in Aquarius in the first house.
Yeah, okay, two things. Number one, we can't do individual charts here like that, so I'm sorry. No, it's okay. But Neptune, but what you're saying brings up something important, because back in 1988, 89, 1991, 92, what year were you born?
2002.
2002. So starting in 90, Uranus and Neptune, and for a short while, for 2.5 years, Saturn, were all moving through Aquarius. So that certainly was a thing. They're now out of Aquarius. In fact, Uranus has moved since 2000. It's moved out of Aquarius and through Uranus has moved out of Aquarius and through Pisces and through Aries. And right now it's at the very last degree of Taurus. In fact, here you can see on July 16th, Uranus is in Gemini. But if we come back to our chart right now, we can see that Uranus is at 29, just over 29.5 degrees of Taurus, meaning it's a half a degree away from changing signs. Uranus moves into the new sign Gemini on July 7th. This is the next thing in our little complexity of why things are so fucking crazy right now. Because we have Pluto exploring and getting its legs, if you will, in high frequency, futuristic, technologically ET, AI oriented Aquarius. We have Neptune and Saturn both crystallizing the dreams into reality and melting reality into the dreams. I don't know if any of you are familiar with, over the last few months, some things have kind of hit the internet pretty hard. Does anyone here know the telepathy tapes or talking with ghosts or any of this work? There's a whole, mediumship is not a new thing, but it's broken into new grounds. Even to the extent of AI actually stepping into the realms of what we might call mediumship. That's another rabbit hole I'm not going to go down right now. But you can Google Robert Edward Grant just did a YouTube video with Emilio Ortiz, who has a podcast. Actually, I was on Emilio's show a few months ago. Point is that here again, we're seeing more Saturn-Neptune stuff. We're seeing disincarnate consciousness leaking into the realms of the three-dimensional world. Is it real? What's real? I had a friend in college who actually became a rather famous friend. He wrote all the lyrics, and he was the manager and producer of the band The Blue Oyster Cult. And Sandy used to say, one of his favorite lines was, "Imaginary, but not unreal." Imaginary, but not unreal. Okay, so remember I said the planets have two things that are important aside from their archetype, what they are. Uranus is the planet of sudden change, releasing pent-up tension. Uranus's job, I always like to say, is Uranus's job is the instantaneous resolution of irresolvable forces. How can that be? That's Uranus. And, and you can think of it by thinking of a warm, wet air mass, which creates negative ionization when it moves. Negative ions feel good. Negative ions are generated at the seashore, water moving on water, at a waterfall, in a shower. These are all, they feel good, even like a murmuring brook, because water moving against water creates negative ionization. Meanwhile, cold, dry air creates positive ions, and they don't feel as good. There's a saying, an ill wind blows no good. Anyone ever heard that saying? Well, in Southern California, it's the Santa Anas. In Switzerland, it's the Fen. In Israel, it's the Sabra. Here, it's the Chinooks. There are winds that just create energy that makes the mosquitoes and the flies and the insects buzz, and it doesn't feel good. All right. So there's a bit of a misnomer in the world of psychology that says, if you have a problem, talk about it. It's a good idea. It is a good idea. And I don't know what the percentage is. I could make up a number, 93.15%. Of the time, if there is a problem, it's really good to talk about it, because talking about it helps dissipate the tension. However, there's something in each and every one of your lives or more that you've learned not to talk about, because when you do, the more you talk about it, the worse it gets. Whatever the issue is, it's like when you get together with Frank, don't talk about politics. When you get together with so-and-so, don't bring up astrology. When you get to go with so-and-so, you don't want to talk about child rearing because your belief of how they handle their kids is like abomination, or whatever. But do you understand what I'm saying? There are things that we could talk about in certain instances, or maybe to our therapist, but talking about it makes it worse. This is the shit Uranus loves. Because in a storm, you have a warm, wet air mass that's negatively ionized, and you have a dry, cool air mass that's positively ionized. And as they get closer and closer together, they do what they should do, and that is they try to work it out. But the more they rub up against each other, the stronger the positive ions become, and the stronger the negative ions become. In other words, it becomes more polarized. Does that word have any meaning for us in this historical eon or wherever we're at? And there are conversations that the more you talk about, the greater the polarity gets. So what happens is that Uranus, I have to do this for the effect. So you got these two forces that are not going to work it out. They're just not going to do it. And then all of a sudden, lightning strikes. That's the instantaneous resolution of irresolvable opposites. Doesn't fix the thing forever, but in just a moment, the pressure is off, the tension is released. That's the way Uranus works. Now, for the last 7 years, Uranus has been moving through Taurus. Any Tauruses here? Taurus suns, rising, whatever. Tell me a word or two that comes to mind about Taurus.
Stubborn.
Something else. Good. Huh? Slow. Fixed. Determined. All right. So what do you think happens when lightning starts tickling or trying to move granite? It doesn't change real easily, does it? Uranus is not at home. It's not happy being in Taurus, because the Taurus energy Uranus is still Uranus, it's still lightning, but is just building up its charges until it's so great, then something has to happen, something big. When Uranus moves out of Taurus, which it will on July 7th, into Gemini, do we have any Geminis here? All right, keywords for Gemini, anything, make something up.
Volatile.
Okay, movable, adaptable. I would say, I'm fussy with words like this. It's not that you're wrong, but I would say volatile for an emotional, like Scorpio. Okay. Yeah, more.
Scattered.
Source.
Opposed.
Curious.
Adaptable, movable. What do you think Uranus does in Gemini? It's like reality's greased. And what does Uranus do? It basically takes what's been bubbling and building, and it brings it out into the open. When the lightning strikes, all of a sudden we can see everything in the dark. And then a moment later, it's dark again. But you know what? We know it. We can't unsee it. We know it's there. All right. So Uranus was in Gemini during the American Revolution. The next time Uranus, 84 years, was back in Gemini, the United States was fighting the Civil War. The next time Uranus was in Gemini was the time when the US and the rest of the world was involved in World War II. And now Uranus on July 7th moves back into Gemini.
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah and amen. Okay, does this mean we're going to war? We've not been not at war pretty much for the last 150 years or so. But things will move, and things will move quickly. There are a lot of astrologers who are saying, who are historians, and they're saying that, Uranus in Gemini, the United States is always at war. We're going to war, and obviously the events of the last week certainly might make us worry, or should make us worry, because just of how that fits into everything. Again, regardless of what your individual politics are. But something is very different this time as Uranus is moving into Gemini. And it has to do with the second thing. Remember, I said planets are important by not only their archetypal energy, but two things that affect that. One is what sign they're in. And we now know that Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto and Saturn have all either recently changed signs or are right on the edge of changing signs. And they're all doing it pretty much from a cosmic perspective at the same moment. I mean, it's not the same moment, but within weeks, months, even a year is unprecedented in this way. And the second thing I said was that the relationship between the planet and the other planets, called aspects, the geometric relationship, tempers or changes or alters the energy. And now we come to what's going on now. And am I on the screen, or are we back on the?
You're on the screen. Do you want me to full screen you?
No, I want the chart here in a moment, but I'm going to have to go out and come back in. So I don't know what that's going to do. Hang on one second here.
You need to reshare it.
Okay. Can you do that, or do I have to do that?
You have to do it from your computer.
All right. Oh, there it is. It's hiding at the bottom. And I'm going to go to present and share screen and entire screen or window. I think I
Entire
can.
screen's the easiest way, but window, you can just click on that.
Yeah, I think that,
That'll work. If you'll have to do this again if you switch to a different.
yeah, that's okay. Okay. So we're looking at a chart again here for June 1st. But this chart, instead of having all the different signs in their right place based upon the horizon, I have a chart here that has 0 degrees of Aries on the ascendant, on the horizon. And the reason for that is something's not right here. Oh, no, it's fine. The reason for that is that when we're doing charts for mundane astrology, the word mundane astrologically doesn't mean boring. It means from the Latin word mundus, or world. When we're doing world astrology, if it's nearly sunset here, it may be sunrise somewhere else or midnight somewhere else. And so I take the horizon out of the mix, and we're just looking at the planets in the signs going around naturally: Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, all the way around. Now, the colored lines in the middle are what's showing the mathematical and or the aspects, the geometric relationships. Now, what I want you to see here is that Saturn and Neptune, now at 0 and 1 degree of Aries, is actually making the same angle up here to Pluto as it is down here to Uranus. Let me move this ahead to the middle of the month to get these lines a little bit thicker or more exact. And actually, let me also do one more magical thing here, and that is I'm going to aspected points, and I'm going to just draw the lines into the planets that I want. That's cheating. But what I want here is Pluto, Neptune, Uranus, and Saturn. And we'll just do those for now. So what you can see here is that as Uranus moves into Gemini, Gemini is an air sign. Pluto in Aquarius is an air sign. And if we were to move this ahead a few months, and you can see that the Uranus moving into Gemini is actually moving toward making, and these lines get thicker as the aspect gets more exact, but here you can see that they're moving into a trine from air Gemini to air Aquarius, with Saturn and Neptune right at that halfway point. You see what I'm talking about, this little geometry right here? Well, Uranus and Pluto, that's Uranus down here at 1 Gemini, and Pluto up there at 2 Aquarius. The Uranus-Pluto cycle is incredibly important culturally, historically. In fact, they lined up exactly because of the retrogrades 3 times in 1964 and 1965. Astrologers know, and for those of you who've been listening to me for a long time, you know that the 1960s was basically an astrological artifact of the conjunction between Uranus, the rebellious, exciting, release the tension, upheaval, lightning striking Uranus, lining up with Pluto, the deep hidden underworld, the bacchanalian suppressed energy, the evolutionary perspective. And that Uranus and Pluto, if we were to just really quickly here, jump back to (1965), and aside from anything else, you can see how close, I didn't do this exact, but you can see how close Uranus and Pluto are, and that they were coming actually closer and closer together. There they are at the same degree in December of 1965. So Uranus and Pluto together, in effect, manifested as the social upheaval that we experienced in the 1960s. Now, if we jump this to let's go 2012, we can see that, where the hell's Pluto here? I lost Pluto. There's Uranus.
Is that 10, 12, or 20?
Oh, that's why. Yeah, that's the. Never mind. How about 2012? That'll work. So in 2012, you can see here that Pluto and Uranus, actually, if we move this ahead a month or so, Uranus is retrograde. We'll move this there. There you can see how exact it is there. They did this 5 times between 2012 and 2015. And 2012 to 2015, in some ways, harkened back to the mid-60s because you had issues of gender equality like you did in the 60s. You had issues of drug use, which became recreationally legalized or medically legalized. And that was an issue in the mid-60s. You had power issues, people demonstrating on the streets, the Arab Spring, the Occupy Wall Street during that period of time. You had civil rights issues. Ferguson, Missouri happened during that period of time. And so there was a throwback to those things that happened in the 60s that were back in our face. They never really went away. But the square, in some ways, is like a crisis of what are we gonna keep paying attention to and what are we gonna let go of? So that 2012 and really 2012 to 2015, but really all the 2020s was tied to this Uranus square Pluto. Now we're coming into the, 2026. And let's move this. Yeah, here we go. So we're going to get a flavor of this 1 year from now. But this Uranus-Pluto trine has Neptune right at that middle point. And astrologically, the Uranus-Pluto trines are smooth. They're flowing. It's not good or bad. It's just the energy flows. With a square, like there was in 2012 through 2015, the energy is conflictive. It's a break. Like in the mid-60s, when they were conjunct, the energy was compressed. The power point was all at one. But we have Uranus moving into Gemini, as it has done already 3 times when the U.S. has been at war. But it's never moved into Uranus as it's been trining Pluto. And on top of that, because trines are flowing. The energy is an easy energy. Whether it's good or bad doesn't matter. I mean, too much of a flow could be, awful. It can create a flood. And we can talk about that in a few minutes also. Because Neptune is also in the mix. And Neptune is making a sextile that's 1/2 of a trine to both Pluto at the top of this chart and Uranus down toward the bottom. And a sextile, also like a trine, is flowing, but it's more like an opportunity that says there's cooperation, but you got to do something about it. And so what do we got to do about it? Neptune is what? Imagination, dreams, vision. And of course, right now, we're getting that with Neptune lining up with Saturn, taking that vision and moving it. Here we go through July and August. You can see how thick these lines begin to get. as Uranus moves into Gemini and as Pluto retrogrades back toward its first of the 5 trines to Uranus. We've never seen anything like this. And again, any competent astrologer is going to look at the past occurrences and try to understand what the pattern is and how that pattern recurs. That's what we do. And any astrologer who looks at this and says, oh, this is what's going to happen, is making shit up. But that's what we astrologers do too. You know, but we make that shit up based upon archetypes that are real. And here, the energy is suggesting that there is a flow of energy. And I've been saying for a few years now that depending on what happens from 2024 into 2025 into early 2026 is going to cool down into a solid alloy, the way when you mix bendable, malleable copper with brittle but bendable tin, you heat those two things together and you mix them all together, and then when they cool, they make bronze. And bronze is not going to be reheated down or remelted into something else. And what I'm suggesting is that by the time we get through this summer, we'll have a flavor. We're going to get that flavor already in July. I think in some ways July is it's like a dress rehearsal. It's like we're getting glimpses of the future. But yeah, I got to go here. There's a concept in modern physics called retrocausality. Does anybody know that word? It sounds crazy, but this is an experimental branch of physics that is trying to understand the mechanisms and how the future impacts the present moment. And also how the present moment impacts the past. Yeah. Einstein said that past, present, and future are just imaginal concepts, but they're persistent ones. All the mystical spiritual traditions around the planet agree on at least this one thing, and that is that when we're not in a body, our own, that is, time doesn't exist. Linear time is a function of being in a body that has a perceived beginning, aging process, and end. And that all the spiritual traditions suggest, the Tibetans call the space where we're not in a body, they call those the bardos. People know that word, B-A-R-D-O? Google it. And the bardos are considered to be the in-between spaces. Consciousness does not need a body. Consciousness does fine without meat. This is part of the Saturn-Neptune conjunction that many of us have known for years because we've studied things like either out-of-body travel or reincarnation or past life regression or psychic mediumship or whatever. But with the advent of work like the telepathy tapes and other people doing things of this sort, this is all of a sudden coming so much more into the open that it's hard to look away from this reality. But this concept of retrocausality is really intriguing because the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, that's exact next February, is impacting us right now. It's like it's pulling us like an attractor toward that. The Uranus-Pluto trines that will be exact on and off, they get really close in 2025, but you can see here that they're like just within a couple of degrees away, and they don't make their first exact conjunction until, because Uranus turns retrograde. And so they get within like a sixth of a degree, but it's not until 2026 when we get the first of the 5 actual exact trines. Now, here on July of 2026, and this is the chart that I've been going back to again and again and again these days. Yeah, July 19th, someone's been following me. And whoops, hold on one second. I want to add aspected points, and I want to add the moon and Jupiter here, and back this up a few hours. And there's no astrologer who's ever seen a pattern quite like this. This has the exact, well, it's not the word in astrology is partile, the same degree number. Pluto at 4 degrees of air Aquarius, trine Uranus at 4 degrees air Gemini, both of them sextile Neptune at 4 degrees of Aries, which is trine Jupiter at 4 degrees of Leo, Aries fire, Leo fire. And fire and air have this sextile relationship because fire and air gets along with each other. And then you have the moon sweeping through 4 degrees of Libra. This is like 5 points on a 6-pointed Solomon seal or Star of David. And this is where we're heading. So this is, I don't want to say this is my hope, but this is what I focus on when I'm deciding what to do day by day, week by week, month by month now, because I know by the time we get through this, and granted, this is still a month, 2 months, 3 months shy of election day here in the United States. But when we get to this period of time, that Uranus Pluto opposition will have, it'll still be in effect, but it'll begin to wane. And it's like whatever we're left with by that point in time will be done with. And the fifth and final trine between Uranus and Neptune is in 2027. So we have this period of time coming up that has a flow and has an ease, unlike the conflict that we're having right now. So what do you think? Does this make sense? You know, the thing that I think is really important is that, we can take this thing off the chart and put it back on me. Thanks, Sam. The thing that's important to understand here is that what's going on is real. But it's Saturn and Neptune. And so whatever it seems to be, it's not quite that. And on top of that, what's going on is a major curated distraction. And again, this has nothing to do with my or your political lean, because I don't care what your I care. Whatever your politics are, your reality is still being curated. And that's what's happening, where there is a brush fire of awareness, of consciousness. I don't know whether it will be strong enough and powerful enough to do what needs to be done. It depends on how much each individual feeds into it. Carl Jung, the last book he wrote before he died, a book called The Undiscovered Self, he said that treaties by politicians will never create world peace. World peace will only be created by the peace within the minds of the individuals in the world. All war is basically a projection of our unresolved, fears and issues and stuff. And this is really not any different than the concept of Mahayana Buddhism, which really says, this is my gross oversimplification, but it basically says that no one really gets off the wheel until everyone gets off the wheel, because we live in a world where we're connected to everyone else. And so I think this is the hope of the Pluto in Aquarius and Uranus in Gemini and Neptune in Aries. But we're going to have to do something about it. And it feels at times that there's nothing we can do, except there is. And what we can do is basically put out the brush fires in our own individual lives, because that's what will matter. It's, talking to people about those things that you don't necessarily talk about, but not to convince them that they're wrong and that you're right, even though they may be and you may be. But to understand how they got to where they are. That's really the real issue, because we have to change our perspective here. And I think that it's going to happen. I think that is what's happening. Now, I said I would come back to one other thing about ascension, because there's a lot of stuff going on, about ascension and messages from, the Pleiadians and the Syrians and the Arcturians and ET in general. And I'm not poking fun at any of these things. These are just more Saturn, Neptune things that, regardless of what you think of it, it's probably not what you think. I mean, whether it's crop circles or AI, there's shit going on out there that we don't get, we don't understand. But here's the thing. Ascension simply says that we're vibrating at higher frequencies. Well, I'm standing here with my hand on a device that's vibrating at about 6 billion cycles a second. That would be 6 gigahertz. You go back 50 years, and the highest frequency vibrations in our field was FM radio and television, which was being transmitted over megahertz. That's not billions of cycles, that's millions of cycles. You go back another 50 years, 75 years, and you have AM radio, which was vibrating at kilohertz, thousands of cycles a second. You go back just prior to that, and you have the introduction of AC in our walls, which vibrates at 50 or 60 cycles a second. And before that, the highest frequency vibrations was the vibration of the day and night over 24 hours. Do you see? Marshall McLuhan used to say that environments are invisible. Fish don't see the water. We live in a higher and higher frequency field of electromagnetic vibrations. Cell phones, 50, 60 gigahertz, 50, 60 billion cycles a second. Are we not ascending? When you go onto a Zoom meeting, something happens that most people just don't think about. If this was 100 years ago, and I said to a group, are we all here now? Someone would say, yeah, but Joe's missing. Oh, okay, let's wait for Joe. Now, if I go into a Zoom meeting and I go, are we all here? What's here? And when is here? It's noon here in Seattle, but someone who's here with me, it's 8 o'clock, in Lisbon, PM. It's the following day in Melbourne, and Lisbon and Melbourne and Berlin and Santiago, Chile and Seattle, we're all here. Do you see how we are not the physical beings that we were? And this is not going to be stopped. by the fear of the future, wanting to make things great as they were in the past. This is a basic Freudian concept, you know. Freud wrote about what he called infantile regression. And basically, infantile regression says that when things get bad in your mind, you go back to a place where you thought it was safe. That this is something that just happens naturally because as an infant, we were basically, everything was taken care of, you know, of us, for us. At least it should have been. Not everyone has that, of course. But here's the thing. Whether it was taken care of you, whether it was being taken care of for you or not, you still go back to that because you think it's better than it was now or is now. And that's what we are doing in spades out there. We're trying to make things great again, as if they were great. And it's a form of infantile regression. And it has to do, and again, your politics may be aligned with some of that thinking. This is not about a political belief. It's about an overarching concept of whether we're going to move into the future as Uranus is pushing us to do, as Pluto is pushing us to do, or whether we're going to go back to some place that we thought was safe, as Saturn would like us to do, because Saturn creates the boundaries and is about safety and security and stability. It's not safe and it's not stable now. You know, there's that Hopi prophecy that says that the Hopi elders for years have been talking about a time when the rivers would move fast. That time is now here. The rivers are moving fast, and if you hold on to the shore, you will be torn in half. Push away from the shore and out into the center, and keep your head above water. There's Star Trek, resistance is futile, because the river is flowing, and we can either be ripped in half by trying to hold on to the way we think we would like it to be based upon the way we thought it was. But this prophecy goes on and says, push off into the center. This is obviously my paraphrasing of it. Keep your head above water. Look around and see who's there. This is your new family. Be joyful. Can I go home now? What time is it? Oh yeah, we went way over. Let's take a 10-minute break. And if you've never had your chart done here, I have these little things to fill out. We'll take a 10-minute break for those of you who are hardy of soul. I will draw 3 names. I can't do it out of a hat because I didn't bring my hat with me tonight, but we'll find something, a basket or something. Fill out your name, your birth date, place and time, your email address. That'll get you on my email list also. If you're not on my email list, you can fill out one of these. Just don't put in your birth data. If you do put in your birth data, I will draw 3 names, and thank you. And we will look, and you'll get to see how astrology works when we're not talking about what I like to call cosmic bullshit, but when we're talking about our own individual bullshit, which is always more interesting. So we'll take about a 10-minute break. Thank you to the baristas. Also, yeah, two things. If you haven't paid $5 and can, please do that. That's what keeps this thing going. This money doesn't go into my pocket. I do this as a community service, but it helps pay for the additional hours that people are here. And also, the best thing you can do is to buy something. Economic voting, shop. If you have some birthday coming up or something, there's a lot of cool stuff around the store. Spend a little money. I'll see you in about 10 minutes. Oh, one last thing I would like to say, though, and that is that for those of you here and online, I just want to remind you that I will be going back to Goa for the 2-week retreat. Now, there's a couple people here who have been to Goa. And this is a place where I've been teaching at it regularly. This will be my fourth time at the same place. It's an Ayurvedic healing spa in the south end of Goa, India. We still have a handful of slots open. They will fill up. And if you're interested, either see me or go to Heaven and Earth Workshops, all one word, heavenandearthworkshops.com. And if you're interested in the day-to-day thing for the month of July, I will have that posted on July 1st. Also, I've done a July overview in-depth analysis with Amanda Pula-Walsh that'll be on Astrology Hub. And so that's it. We're now officially on a 10-minute break. And thank you all to you out there in internet land, and appreciate your waiting until we had our stuff worked out. So that's it. Wait, one second.
And they do. Like, having the.
Okay.
Yeah, you're fun if you did that.
So am I sharing? Are we on live?
You already lied.
And I think here the best thing for me to do is just share the entire screen. Okay, we are live again. And there's a lot of hardy people. Now, usually we have more people here at the beginning and more people leave. And tonight we had a few less people here at the beginning, but it's like you all stayed. Oh, all right. When I was in, let me just think of where this was, in Stockholm, I did 15 charts it was a 2-day chart interpretation workshop. And the first day was lecture presentation of material. And on the second day, there were 17 students in the class. And two of them were teachers. And so I did 15 charts in one day. So 3 charts is not bad to do right now. All right. Ta-dum, 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 ta-dum. All right. The first chart that we have is Susanna. Where are you? There you are. I know Susanna. Susanna used to be in my apprentice program until she graduated herself. All right, what the heck's going on here? No, I don't want any of this. What the hell?
AI's taken over, baby.
It has. All right. Well, we've taken back over from AI. Okay. This is April 28, 72 at 2:08 p.m. in Columbus, Ohio. And we have to get these points back here going. Hang on one second. There we go. All right. Susanna, how you been? Great. How's your book coming?
Almost done.
Yeah.
Out next month.
Ooh. Ooh. All right. what do we see about Susanna's chart?
Venus conjunct Mars.
It's a big opposition.
Okay, we have Venus conjunct Mars, a big opposition. Now, the Chiron Uranus part of that opposition, which is the closest, is actually, I don't want to say the least interesting, but Chiron was pretty much opposed Uranus for almost 20 years on and off through the late 60s, 70s, early 80s. They just happen to have been traveling around the same speed. But what is interesting is that we have Chiron conjuncting Eris and Mercury coming into that conjunction. So there's something here, I think, in that opposition about the Mercury and Aries communicating something new, doing pioneering work. Eris, the cosmic badass. Eris, Eris was Mars's sister. And how many people here use Eris in charts? Some. How many people here use Chiron? How many people use Pluto? So you are selective as to the new planets that you use. You'll all be using Eris in 10 years. Eris, like every new planet that is discovered, is originally thought to be like the worst thing ever. I mean, when Uranus was discovered, it was the planet of disruption and destruction, cataclysm. And then only later did it become associated with invention and genius and breakthrough. And Neptune was the planet that was basically psychotic, delusional, mental institutions. There was nothing good about Neptune. And gradually, as we learned to assimilate it, it became, more of our creative imagination. And in a way, I think it's the spiritual, the non-physical dimensions. And I think the same is true with Eris. When Eris first was being used, everyone just said Eris was the sower of discord. And she is. Again, Eris is Mars's sister. And she was a bit of a badass. But she stirred things up in order to see what wasn't part of the system and then how to integrate it. So she's concerned with the disenfranchised, certainly, gender issues, but any disenfranchised people, she wants to stir things up so that it's obvious what's going on, to integrate that at a higher level. And Chiron, which is about a 50-year cycle, it catches up with Eris about every 51 years because Eris moves so slowly. And so we have in the sky right now a Chiron-Eris conjunction. And so that may be humming some of Susanna's stuff about how that tied to what it is that she communicates in kind of a disruptive manner, especially with the opposition to Uranus. There's something here about stirring things up. On top of that, we have going on in the sky right now the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, and Susanna has Saturn opposite Neptune. And so those issues are part of her stuff, the what is real, what is not real, the whole sense of, delusion or disillusion, the make it real. And then the fact that she was born at a full moon. Was she born after or before the full moon? How many hours? It's really easy. Yeah, no, the moon moves 1 degree, about 1 degree every 2 hours. So the sun was at 8.5 degrees and the moon is almost 11.5. So this is because I don't have Excel. 8, 9, 10, 11, that's 3 degrees or about 6 hours after the full moon. But Saturn on the midheaven, we would also assume that, there's a whole Mercury thing going on here, is there not, with Virgo rising. Therefore, Mercury is the ruler of the ascendant, which is an important consideration. And with Saturn and the Venus-Mars conjunction, also in Gemini midheaven, it's not surprising that Susanna is, amongst whatever else she does in her life, writing a book. And then the Jupiter trine the sun would sort of suggest this kind of optimistic, bountiful philosophy or idea. There's a bit of certainly an upscale energy here. And then the other thing is that full moon in Scorpio is also very tightly quincunx. It's partile, 11 degrees Scorpio to 11 degrees Aries. It's quincunx Mercury, which would suggest that the feelings and the intellect sometimes have this dance that they need to work out. So, Susanna, what's your book about?
Ending the patriarchy.
So that reminds you, for those of you who didn't hear or online, Susanna said, just kind of casually and softly, ending the patriarchy. You've probably seen that picture of one of the demonstrations a few years ago with a woman holding the sign that says, "My favorite season is the fall of patriarchy." So that certainly feels like some of that energy, does it not? What's your favorite thing in your chart?
Oh, I've never thought of that. Probably that my north node is at 29.
Susanna said that her favorite thing in her chart is the North Node at 29 Capricorn. And why would that be your favorite thing, aside from the fact that my Jupiter is at 29 Capricorn?
I don't know. I think it just speaks to really following destiny, stably with strength and structure, but going for it. Anoretic, so pronounced.
Yes, the word is anoretic. I always want to say anorexic degree, but it's the anoretic degree. Actually, so is your Pluto. But with the nodes, that 29 degree is really a misnomer, because the last degree of the sign would actually be 0 degrees because the nodes move backwards. So it's kind of a funny thing to say that with the nodes, but yeah. So as I look at your chart, the thing that would strike me, remember the chart that we looked at earlier for July 19th, 2026? This is when Susanna will be awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature. Yeah, I'm overstating this, of course. But what's going to happen then is Uranus will be on her midheaven, conjunct her Saturn and opposed her Neptune. Neptune will be at 4 Aries, and that'll be trine her natal Neptune and sextile the Saturn on the midheaven. And what am I missing? And Uranus, and Pluto will be at 4 degrees of Aquarius, trining the midheaven and Saturn. So I think that's going to be, I think that everything that you're doing now will come to a culmination then. But even now, as we're getting this first wave of the Uranus coming into Gemini, and the Pluto coming into the sextile and trine from Aquarius, sextile to Pluto and trine to Saturn, that all of these things, and of course the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, but then Saturn sextiling its own place as it moves to 5 Aries, and then and trining Neptune, and followed by Neptune. I think that I think that in July, and if you're saying you're really that close to finishing, it's almost like this is a glimpse, of what's around the bend. Does that make sense a little bit?
Yeah, cool. Yeah, we're picking out the cover now.
Oh, that's exciting. What's the name of the book?
Ara and the Dead Feminists.
Say again?
Ara and the Dead Feminists.
It's a novel.
Yeah.
Got it. Cool. I like it. Yeah, what else can we say? Uranus coming to the top of the charts is a big deal. I mean, I think that over the next year or two, as Uranus goes over the midheaven and Saturn opposing Neptune back and forth, that there'll be some real surprises. And I just wish you the best of luck. All right. Thanks, Susanna. Next, we have Jan.
Is it another girl?
Jan M. Yes. Since we're online, I tend not to use last names, but yes. And Jan. October 30th, 1952. Aha, I know that time. I'll tell you why in a minute. October 30th, 52. My younger sister was born on October 14th, 1952, as was Caroline Casey, for anyone here who knows Caroline's work. My sister and Caroline have the same birthday, same year. And 4:48 a.m. And that is in P-I-T-T-S-B-U-R. That'll work. G-H-P-A. And Jen, do you know your chart some? Do you know your chart a little bit? You know your sign.
Yeah.
What's your sign?
So Scorpio
Yep,
with an Aries moon, I believe.
I believe that's true.
And maybe a Libra ascendant.
And that's true also. So we have a Libra ascendant, with Saturn Neptune very closely conjunct, which means that the Saturn Neptune that's playing now in the sky, even though it's not making an aspect specifically to planets in your chart, well, it's certainly close to the moon, so it's right there. In other words, the Saturn Neptune conjunction, right now Neptune is at 2 degrees Aries and Saturn is at 1 degree, so they're just both pushing on that moon. And I would imagine that there are changes like around the corner, or things are going on that may have to do with home and family or kids or stuff like that, just because the Saturn Neptune is right there. But I would also imagine that I don't want to say it's impossible, but it's improbable that what happens will be what you expect to happen. Or in other words, it's not that it's going to be shocking, surprising. It's just that there's a process here, and that it's hard to tell. You can see the big events happening, but not until you're through it will you really be able to know, what it is. The other piece here that I think is important is that the moon is close to Eris, so we have another, perpetual badass, so to speak. The person who wants to stir up a little trouble, and especially because that moon and Eris are square to Chiron and Mars in Capricorn, and that's kind of someone who is not going to stop until they're done doing what they're doing. Even though the moon in Aries often can be a fire starter and then walk away from it, the Mars and Chiron together in Capricorn, coupled with the Scorpio moon, kind of suggests that there's some staying power, in the battles that you choose. You don't let go of them, until they're done, whatever that means. And then the other piece of that, and you can see the square here, which is basically, in some ways, it represents the ongoing dynamic conflict between how you feel in the moment, because you know how you feel, that Aries moon responds in the moment, and versus what it is that you know you should do. You know, I think of Ram Dass saying, I've been should upon long enough. And in a way, your chart has that early on having to take responsibility and not quite get away with doing what you want to do, instead doing what you have to do. But here's the thing, is you see those orange lines connecting the square between the moon Eris and Chiron Mars, the orange lines making this isosceles triangle. Here, let's do this right here. Aspected points, temp, and edit. And we want Pluto and the moon and Mars, Chiron, and Eris. See that? So, do people know what a yod is? Some people. So a yod is when you have two planets that are sextile. These are not, these are square. But if you have two planets that are sextile, 60 degrees apart, each of those planets make a quincunx, which is 5/12 of a circle, 150 degrees, to a planet opposite it. And this pattern of a yod is considered to be an important picture that planets make, a configuration. This is like a yod, except it's a square and a square and a half and a square and a half, not traditional aspects. A lot of people call this Thor's hammer, and a lot of people call this an iron yod. It basically says that the square planets at the base kind of work their stuff out through the planet at the apex, the point of the pyramid, which is Pluto. And that's powerful. That's like, I'm beginning to see that, you, whether you've gone through life being a teacher, a parent, that Libra rising is the go-between, is the person who cares, the person who wants to make it okay for other people. Now with the Saturn Neptune there, often there's a sense of art, not always, but there's something to do with the spiritual or artistic or musical or something that's Neptunian that Saturn wants to bring into, but you do it in a way that is nice. People like you until. What's that? Well, until the Mars, the Mars Eris square, the Moon Eris square Mars Chiron, until the wound is tickled, and then the hammer comes down, and that Saturn Neptune is not as easy, and then the Scorpio Sun, which I think likes to hide behind the I'm really just a nice, gentle Libra, caring about everybody, and that may be true, but you also have an agenda. Maybe all people do, with the Sun and Mercury in Scorpio too. Let's go back and get all the other planets here. Aspect. Yeah, I think the most important thing in your chart is basically the moon in Aries now, which is really being Pluto in Aquarius at 3 degrees of Aquarius, which would be down here, is already sextiling it. That's making a cooperative. It's like you're getting strength from the power of transformation in a way that at other times in your life, these transformations might have been more difficult, but for whatever reason, it's like you have energy in the bank to be able to take care of what you need to take care of as you move through this. Make sense?
I hope so. Big choices.
But Saturn and Neptune are coming up to that moon, and that will be exact next year. And so, I'm wondering, if you move or if there's a physical, change of home, or, I think all of these things are possible, because it's almost like your external environment is not supporting your internal feelings. And so something has to change. One astrologer wrote, it's like the snake outgrowing its skin. Looks good from the outside. Wow, isn't that cool? The snake just gets big and then it sheds its skin and it's got new skin. For the snake, it can't breathe because the skin is so tight. And it knows if it takes a really deep breath, the skin's going to rip. And it's their skin. And when it does rip and falls away, what's left is baby butt, soft, tender, vulnerable skin. And so there's a process here of moving through the end of something and into the beginning of something else that, with Neptune there, I don't think you'll know what it is until you're into it and maybe even through part of it. Does this make some sense to you?
You're totally hitting it all on the head.
Do you want to share anything with us? If not, that's okay.
I've lived in the Pacific Northwest for like 30, 40 years. And now it looks like I might be going back to Pittsburgh, PA. And I have reasons to not want to leave here at all. But it seems like I might be making that move. I'm just trying to figure out why. But it seems like you're hitting it all right in the head, really.
Yeah, I think it's going to take a year for that to play on through, a year or so even. Don't rush it. Even when Mercury turns retrograde, don't fall into the trap like you need to make a decision today.
And I have a feeling I might make that move back there and then end up coming back here.
Yeah. Yeah.
We'll see. We'll see.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
All righty. And number 3, Stacy. Stacy. Okay. February 28th, 1978. 5 p.m. Sounds rounded off.
Birth certificate.
Still sounds rounded off. I don't trust any birth certificate. Most births born in a hospital, most delivery room doctors, do this, do that, and then go paperwork, and they go back and they go, 5 o'clock.
I know I'm a Virgo, right?
Well, there you go. All right. New Hyde Park, a Long Island girl. Well, new. Okay. What do you notice first? Grand Trine in water. That's this blue triangle. And the other thing I notice is that there's a lot of scattered energy in this chart. In other words, there's just a lot of energy everywhere. And the predominance of those orange lines and red lines, they're kind of more engaging, conflictive, and that's not bad. It just means that Stacy is someone who gets up in the morning and knows what needs to be done. Not saying she does it, but gets up in the morning and knows what needs to be done. Why do I say not saying she does it? Well, because a grand trine, even though in traditional astrology, the grand trine is considered to be like an ultimate blessing because the planets all flow from one to another to another. Does anybody here know the work of Brene Brown? Yeah. All right. So the problem with the grand trine is, according to Brene Brown, and I'm not sure that she's the first person who ever said this, but there's no intimacy without vulnerability. And grand trines are self-sufficient. That doesn't mean that Stacy is self-sufficient, but there's a part of her that has this water, emotional self-sufficiency that suggests it doesn't matter what's going on in your life. You go to your room and you close your eyes and on comes your closed circuit TV that's playing your program with your emotions, and you go, yep, they're mine. There's a familiarity. And sometimes that grand trine is like driving a car with the wheels spinning on ice, because there's no resistance. The energy just keeps going around, and sometimes it's hard to get traction. Now, I'm not saying that that's Stacy's predominant thing. Why? Because squares and semi and sesqui-squares, the squares, the red lines, and the semi and sesqui-squares, the orange lines, they're in a way the opposite of the flow of the trines. They're resistance, and they require intervention, action, engagement. And so we look at some of those other squares and half squares and squares and a half, including the Venus square to Neptune, and we go, a romantic fantasy, big. And yet with Virgo rising, people on the outside might think you're a lot more practical and grounded than you really are. Not that you're not grounded at all, but there's a sense that the attraction, the desire, the dreams, the illusions are big in your life. Now, when I say a romantic, I don't necessarily just mean someone who's always in love. I mean, in the sense of the romanticism, the romantic era. And that is, there's a lot more going on in your mind at all times compared to what's going on out there. And almost to the extent that sometimes it's way more important. And the cool thing about this is that Neptune, whether it's fantasy, dreams, and illusion, or spiritual practice, that Neptune, because it's square to the Venus, and Venus is a point on that grand trine, Neptune actually helps you break out of that do nothing, go nowhere, everything will take care of itself grand trine. But Neptune as the action planet is kind of strange, because normally Neptune says, whatever. And so there's this dance, I think, between dreams, and reality. And then we look at Saturn, which is just barely risen over the horizon. And Saturn is very closely, very, very closely sextile to Jupiter. And this to me tells me or suggests that you have a really good sense, without looking at your astrology chart, of knowing when to do it and when not to do it, whatever it is. That there's just this kind of ongoing work of support between Jupiter, the potential of what's possible, and Saturn, how am I going to make it real? And I think that that's a really strong piece in your chart. And I think that sometimes people could probably mistake your quietness or your softness or your timidness for lack of power, but I don't think that's the case at all. What do you think? Huh?
Right. Yeah. I agree.
Tell us something else. Oh, tell us something about that moon, the Moon-Uranus conjunction, which is one of the points on that grand trine. And it's a Moon-Uranus conjunction in Scorpio. And there's a bit, someone used the word volatility earlier. This is volatility. Now, it looks on the surface pretty calm and restrained, but I would imagine that when you get pushed too far, and it's not about aggressively asserting or pushing yourself into someone else's spaces, it's when someone pushes into your space, it's like you could all of a sudden get crazy. And I don't know if that's true, or is that true? And I don't mean as a regular thing. It's just Mars in Cancer is not outwardly assertive and aggressive, but it's very strong at defensive tactics to protect oneself, one's family, one's children, one's loved ones. And you don't mess with the Mars in Cancer, even though they look like they're tame. And the fact that that Mars in Cancer is trine to the moon and Uranus tells me that there's something electrical. There's something that can be sudden there, that can be volatile. Not necessarily bad, especially because it's trine to Venus in Pisces. And when Venus is not in its home signs of Taurus or Libra, Pisces is Venus's favorite place to be. It's said to be exalted in Venus. So that's a pretty sweet grand trine there. Your turn. Tell us something.
I'm a CFO, but I also have like a double life. So I'm a CFO, but I love to be a hero. I teach at a mystery school once a month, and when I'm teaching and talking about spiritual concepts, like God's speaking.
Right. So for those of you online who couldn't hear, Stacy said that she lives a bit of a double life, and Virgo rising, immutable signs all have a bit of doubleness. And the Jupiter in Gemini, more doubleness, and Pisces, another mutable sign, doubleness, and Neptune in Sagittarius, another mutable sign. But that Neptune then being the escape valve from the complacency of what you do in the outer world. And of course, Virgo is in some ways the sign of the person who works with details. And I would assume as a CFO, it really stretches that Mercury in Pisces that would much rather dream, than deal with spreadsheets. But that Virgo rising with Saturn right there probably gives you the ability to stay focused on that when you need to. That's all we're getting from you? Yeah?
Well, yeah, I mean, and but it's a struggle. I feel like that math is getting old.
Yeah.
And that more of that Pisces energy and that side of myself wants to come through. I'm feeling drained by that math.
Yeah.
Right now, still on the
Yes. You remember Uranus right now is at 29 Taurus. So it's just gone over the midheaven, but still going to retrograde, dance back toward it. And so there's certainly some unsettled sense of something needs to explode, something needs to change. And again, coming back to that Moon-Uranus conjunction, I would imagine that when the time is right, you'll explode something.
That's true. I really resonate a lot with what you said about Jupiter and Saturn. Like when I really thought I get the ball and I follow that, like my own timing is very much.
Some people, I mean, Jupiter is the planet of expansion, and Saturn is the planet of contraction, and that's how things move along, even in our esophagus or in our colon or a snake. It's the waves of expansion and contraction, for you medical geeks, called peristalsis, that moves things along. And that's Jupiter expansion, Saturn contraction. Now, so does anyone here in their chart know they have Jupiter Saturn square like it is right now in the sky, where the expansion and contraction are at odds with one another, or conjunct or opposed? So that is a bit more complicated, because sometimes you don't know whether to push ahead or to just hold in. It's that old Kenny Rogers song of knowing when to hold and when to fold, or when to walk away, or whatever the hell the words are to that. But in Stacy's case, Stacy just has this bump. I don't know if that, I think that's the right use. There's just a sense of knowing when to push and when not to push. And not that it is infallible, but more often than not, where other people struggle with those kinds of decisions, Stacy seems to make them work. Yeah. I think that's enough. And with that, I think we're going to close up shop. Thank you for the 3 people who were willing to put themselves out in front of us. I will be here again on the first Friday of whatever next month is, August, and I don't have the date in front of me. Huh? What is it? No, but first Friday of August, we will be back on a regular schedule, August 1st. So we'll see you here on August 1st. And for those of you who get my stuff online, my July forecast will be up on Tuesday on July 1st. And with that, thank you for your support. And we are done. Thank you to the people online. Thank you, Sam, for your help. Thank you, Gail, for your help. I really appreciate what you do. Hold on, I'm going to stop sharing. And I think I'm now back in front of everyone. And thank you all to the people online. This will be on YouTube later tonight once I get the graphics adjusted, and you can watch any part of it at your leisure. And that's it. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
I have 3 books.
Making